Hi there, my name is Nicolas Callisto. I'm here to discuss a current issue that is causing a bit of controversy here, leading up to the Australia Day celebrations on January 26th. This day has ignited the argument between the public of whether Australia Day should be celebrated to a different day, so as not to respect the Aboriginal people of Australia. Based on Australia's history, I strongly believe that Australia Day should be celebrated on a different day for several reasons. Firstly, to the Aboriginal people, January 26 represents Invasion Day and the beginning of the end for their culture. Secondly, it's a topic that's dividing the country when it should be a day of unity and celebration. And lastly, changing the day would be a way of respecting and acknowledging the Indigenous community of this land. To begin with, January 26th is not a day of celebration for the Australian Aboriginal people, but a day of mourning. Before the British arrived, there were more than 750,000 Aboriginal people living in Australia. There were over 500 different clan groups around the land, many with distinctive cultures, beliefs and languages. The Aboriginal people had developed over 60,000 years, making them the custodians of the world's most ancient living culture. Captain Arthur Phillip, commander of the First Fleet and the first governor of New South Wales, arrived at Sydney Cove on January 26, 1788, the day we now celebrate Australia Day. They did not acknowledge the Indigenous people or respect their way of life, calling them savages and describing the land as being a terra nullius. This is Latin for land belonging to no one. Think about the huge impact this has had on the Aboriginal people. They were essentially seen as nothing, non-human. They no longer had any rights to the land, and if an Aboriginal person was seen anywhere near British property, they would be shot and killed. Many massacres occurred across Australia between the British and the Aboriginal people. One of these occurred on the very same day in 1838, when the Aboriginal people from northwest New South Wales were brutally killed at Waterloo Creek. Many more massacres took place both before and after this. The British also introduced diseases such as smallpox, syphilis, tuberculosis, influenza, and measles. Each of these diseases resulted in many deaths to the Aboriginal Australians. The combination of disease, loss of land, and violence reduced the Aboriginal population by 90% between 1788 and 1900. So I ask you, why on earth would any Indigenous Australian want to celebrate January 26, the day that initiated the end of the Aboriginals' way of life, freedom, and culture? Secondly, this subject is causing a division amongst the people of this great land, on a day when we should be united as one to celebrate all our differences and show respect to the original owners of this land. Nevertheless, this is a topic that's not dying. In 2018, Melbourne organised an Australia Day rally that attracted more than 30,000 Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians determined to abolish Australia Day. Professor Sarah, co-chairman of the Prime Minister's Indigenous Advisory Council and internationally renowned educator, said celebrating the anniversary of the First Fleet's arrival would never be accepted by the majority of Australian, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Quote, "We could pretend that Australia Day is something that unites us when clearly it's something that divides us. Don't compel us to have to stand by and have to celebrate that with you." End quote. So clearly, Australia Day is not a day of celebration for everybody, and in fact it's doing the opposite. In January this year, the New Daily newspaper credited a poll of 45,000 people asking them if they wanted to change Australia Day to another day. Every state and territory had voted to change the day, with a total average of 63% wanting the date changed. In all, it's causing division and anguish between the community when there is a simple solution to the problem: just change the date. And lastly, if the government and the people of Australia decided to change the date, it would cause no harm to anyone, but instead cause peace and harmony to the 800,000 Aboriginal population. This act would be a remarkable way of respecting and acknowledging the Indigenous population. this act would be of this name. On May 26th, 1998, the then Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd, apologised to the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people for their treatment. This means that the government acknowledged the many wrongs that were done to them. However, if we were truly sorry, we would not be celebrating Australia Day on January 26, a day that causes a significant amount of grief and so many dreadful memories. Some people would argue that the only day to celebrate Australia Day is on January 26th, because this is the day that the first fleet of British ships arrived in 1788. Some people would argue that changing the day would not change history or the way that the Aboriginal Australians were treated. But I believe that it's worth a try if it brings comfort, peace, and unity to our country. To conclude my argument, I deeply believe that it is essential that we change the day that we celebrate Australia Day. Australia Day needs to be celebrated on a day that doesn't reflect on the horrors of our past. It needs to be a day that shows the Indigenous Australians that we respect and value their culture, a day that unites us rather than divides us. A day when we can all come together to celebrate our differences, whether you came to this land 60,000 years ago, 230 years ago, or migrated here last week. Thank you for listening.